The big music hall was alive with sound and activity. People in fancy dresses and polished shoes hurried across the polished floor. The air smelled faintly of fresh flowers, and the waxed wooden floors gleamed under the bright chandeliers. Everyone seemed to have a place, a role, and a purpose except for one quiet figure moving slowly in the background. She was a simple woman, dressed plainly in a modest outfit. Her hair was tied neatly at the back, and her shoes were practical, not stylish. She carried a small cleaning bag and moved carefully, trying not to disturb anyone. Most people barely noticed her. In a room full of talented musicians, rich sponsors, and proud parents, she might as well have been invisible. She loved music more than anything in her life. That's why she came to this hall every day, not as a performer, not as a guest, but as a cleaner. While she dusted the chairs and polished the floors, she listened. Every note, every chord, every rhythm flowed into her mind. She memorized them, imagined herself playing the music. Even though no one ever asked her to, the hall was buzzing with preparation for a big event. Famous musicians were practicing, their fingers moving quickly over the keys, their expressions serious. The sound of tuning pianos, murmured instructions, and occasional applause for a perfect performance filled the air. People rushed past her without a second glance. They didn't see the passion shining in her eyes or the small, secret smile on her lips when a melody touched her heart. Today was different. The air seemed charged with excitement. A world-renowned maestro was coming to attend the event. His reputation preceded him, strict, perfectionist, and incredibly talented. Musicians and students alike were nervous. Some paced in the corridors, while others whispered about how impossible it would be to impress him. The simple woman moved quietly, doing her work while listening to the rehearsals. She had seen many performers come and go, some with skill, some without, but none of them had the way of making music speak from the soul like she imagined it could. She had spent years imagining the piano as her voice, a way to express everything she felt but could not say in words. While she was polishing the last row of chairs, she noticed one of the performers was missing. There had been an accident, someone said, but nobody seemed to know where they were. Panic began to ripple through the organizers. The event could not start late. The audience was arriving soon. Every minute mattered, and the empty slot on the schedule became a problem that seemed impossible to solve. The people in charge whispered nervously. Some suggested skipping the slot, but others argued that the schedule must be maintained. The tension grew, and everyone in the hall felt it. Even the musicians practicing in the background seemed to play with more urgency. As if the music itself sensed the worry in the room, the simple woman paused for a moment, leaning lightly against a column. She could hear every argument, every worried comment. She was invisible, but somehow she felt present in a way no one else did. She had spent her life watching, listening, and learning without anyone noticing. Every note she had memorized, every song she had imagined playing was ready in her mind, but she was scared. The thought of stepping out of the shadows into the spotlight terrified her. What would people think if she played? She was not a trained musician in the eyes of the world, just a woman who cleaned floors and listened quietly. She felt small and unworthy compared to the students with polished performances and the famous musicians with their glittering reputations. Still, the empty slot remained. The organizers were desperate. One of them, frustrated and out of options, let out a nervous laugh. "Maybe someone else can fill in," they said, glancing around the room. "Anyone at all, even." "Her," they added, pointing toward the simple woman. The comment was meant as a joke, but it made a ripple through the room. The people nearby laughed, some openly mocking the idea. "Her? She can barely touch the keys," someone whispered, shaking their head. The simple woman's heart pounded. She didn't know if she wanted to run or if she wanted to try. She wanted to leave, to disappear into the background where she belonged. But a small, stubborn part of her, her love for music, refused to let the moment pass. She walked slowly toward the piano. Every step felt heavy. People stopped laughing as she moved, a few exchanging confused or curious glances. Nobody expected anything to come of this. The room was full of experts, but she had something they didn't: years of silent practice. of imagining herself at this very piano in front of a crowd. Playing every note with feeling, she reached the piano and touched the keys gently, almost nervously. Her hands trembled, but inside her mind, every melody she had ever imagined played clearly. She sat down and took a deep breath. She could hear the audience, the murmurs, the rustle of clothing, the faint smell of polished wood and flowers. It was overwhelming. The maestro had arrived. He was tall and imposing, his sharp eyes scanning the room, looking for talent. When he saw her, he raised an eyebrow, curiosity mixing with disbelief. He didn't know her, hadn't seen her before, and he certainly didn't expect much. After all, she was just a woman cleaning the hall, right? How could someone like her possibly play for him? The audience began to settle, expecting a short and awkward display before the next performer came. Some pulled out phones, quietly recording the moment for fun. Everyone thought this would be amusing, a small joke to laugh about later. But the simple woman didn't see them, didn't care about their judgments. She focused entirely on the keys, on the music she had carried in her heart for so long. Her fingers hovered above the keys. Her breathing slowed as she remembered every note she had imagined, every song she had rehearsed in secret. This was the moment she had dreamed about quietly, alone, for many years. She could play, she could show the world what she had been hiding. And yet she was terrified. And then, just as the hall quieted in expectation, she pressed down her fingers. The first notes flowed out softly, like a gentle stream at dawn. At first, it was quiet, almost tentative, but each note carried clarity and feeling. Those who were listening closely noticed something strange. The sound was not just music. It was emotion, it was depth, it was a story being told without words. People stopped laughing. The rustling quieted. Even the musicians practicing nearby paused, their eyes widening in surprise. The maestro leaned forward slightly, his sharp gaze fixed on her hands. Something about the music was different. Something about the way she played was real. The simple woman didn't look at anyone. She didn't need to. The music carried her and she let herself sink into it. Every note, every chord, every pause came from the heart. She had lived this music in secret, and now it was alive. The hall was silent, but for the music, for the story her fingers were telling, and in that moment something extraordinary began. The room full of critics, experts, and performers, all the people who had ignored her, felt a shift. Something that had been invisible, unnoticed, and underestimated was suddenly undeniable. The first notes were played, but they hinted at more to come. Something was about to happen that nobody in the hall could have imagined. The simple woman had stepped forward, quietly, with courage she didn't know she possessed. And with those first notes, she began to change everything. The simple woman sat at the piano, her hands resting lightly on the keys. Her fingers trembled, not from weakness, but from the weight of the moment. The air in the hall was thick with expectation, curiosity, and a little bit of mockery. People whispered to each other, some trying to hide their smiles, others openly laughing. "She can't play, can she?" One person murmured. "This is going to be funny," said another, but inside her a quiet determination had taken hold. She had imagined this moment countless times. She had practiced in silence, late at night when the world was asleep. She had imagined herself in this very hall, facing a crowd, facing doubt, and letting the music speak. Now, all that preparation and longing converged. She glanced briefly at the audience. Rich patrons with critical eyes, students with polished performances behind them, and even the maestro, whose sharp gaze studied her with obvious disbelief. None of them expected anything. They all thought she was just a joke, a temporary filler until a real performer arrived. And yet, she felt ready, more ready than she had ever been. For a long moment, she didn't move. Her hands hovered over the keys as she took a deep breath. She could feel every pair of eyes on her, every whisper, every judgment. The pressure was enormous. Some part of her wanted to run, to hide, to disappear back into the quiet life she knew. But another part, a stronger, braver part, urged her forward. This was her chance. This was her moment. Then she pressed the first key. A soft, clear note filled the air. It was delicate, gentle, almost hesitant, but it had a beauty that immediately caught the listeners off guard. People who had been whispering stopped. A few leaned forward, confused. The maestro raised his eyebrows, a flicker of curiosity in his expression. She continued, slowly at first, letting her fingers find the music in her mind and heart. The melody was simple, but each note carried emotion, a depth that came from years of longing and secret practice. The laughter that had been floating through the hall vanished. Even the students who had scoffed earlier felt a shiver of surprise. They hadn't expected such precision, such feeling, from someone they had dismissed so quickly. Her confidence grew with every passing second. She closed her eyes and let the music flow. She imagined herself speaking through the notes, telling a story that no words could capture. Each chord told a small part of her life, her quiet mornings, her long nights practicing alone, her dreams of being heard. She poured everything into the music, and the hall responded. The maestro, who had been leaning back in his chair, suddenly sat up straight. His eyes widened slightly. He could not deny what he was hearing. This was no ordinary performance. This was raw talent, untrained in the traditional sense, yet refined through dedication and love. Something about the way she played struck him deeply. It was not just skill. It was honesty, purity, and emotion. Around the hall, the audience began to shift. People who had been skeptical were now leaning forward, captivated. Even those who had mocked her earlier felt a pang of guilt. They had judged her by her appearance, by her plain clothing, by the fact that she cleaned the hall. They had assumed that someone so simple could never produce something so extraordinary. And now they were learning the hard truth. Appearances could be deceiving. The woman's hands moved with increasing confidence. She did not rush. She let each note breathe, each pause speak. The music swelled gently, rising and falling like the waves of a calm sea. She was no longer just playing for herself. She was playing for everyone in the hall, for every person who had doubted her, for every lonely night she had spent imagining this very scene. A few students whispered to each other, unable to hide their amazement. "Where did she learn that?" one asked. "I've never heard anyone play like that without formal training," said another. They were astounded, realizing that this woman, whom they had ignored, possessed a gift they had overlooked entirely. The maestro could no longer contain his focus. He rose from his chair and moved closer to the edge of the stage, studying her hands, her posture, the way she connected with the piano. He had judged countless performers before, many of them talented and trained for years, but there was something different about her. Something raw, honest, and powerful that could not be taught in any music school. Her performance began to grow more complex. She transitioned from the gentle melody to a series of rapid, precise notes that seemed impossible for someone who had never been formally trained. Yet she executed them flawlessly. Every chord, every scale, every pause was intentional, filled with meaning. The audience was silent, hanging on to every sound. The simple woman did not see the crowd. She did not see the cameras or the phones recording her. She only saw the music, felt it in her bones, and let it guide her. Each note was a word, each chord a sentence. She was telling her story in the only way she knew how, through the piano. As she played, memories flooded her mind. Quiet mornings spent practicing on a second-hand keyboard. Evenings filled with dreams that no one else took seriously, moments of doubt when she almost gave up. And yet, through every struggle, she had kept playing, kept imagining, kept believing in the music she loved. Now, in this moment, all of that effort and love was finally visible to the world. Some members of the audience began to cry quietly. They had expected a joke, a funny moment, and instead, they were witnessing something extraordinary. They felt the emotion behind the music, the honesty, and the years of hidden practice that had made this possible. They realized that this woman, whom they had ignored, was sharing a piece of her soul through every note. The maestro finally spoke. Though not out loud, he simply let his body shift forward. Leaning on the piano stand, his eyes wide. He recognized talent when he saw it, and he had never seen anything like this. His mind raced, considering the possibilities, imagining what she could achieve with proper guidance and training. He felt a mixture of astonishment and admiration. Knowing that the world had almost overlooked a true gem, time seemed to slow as she continued to play. Every note built on the last, creating a story that was both personal and universal. She played with passion, with care, and with an understanding of music that transcended technique. She was not performing to impress. She was performing because she had to, because the music had lived inside her for so long and now demanded to be heard. By the time she paused to take a breath, the hall was completely silent. Not a single person moved or spoke. They were all caught in the spell of her performance, realizing they had underestimated her in the most profound way. Even the most experienced musicians in the room felt a quiet sense of humility. They had judged her too quickly, and now they had been shown a truth they could not ignore. For a moment, she looked up, meeting the eyes of the maestro. There was no judgment there, only awe. He nodded slightly, a silent acknowledgement that he had been proven wrong. The simple woman had done what so many had thought impossible. She had commanded the attention and respect of everyone in the room without a single word, without showiness or theatrics, simply by letting the music speak for her. As she lifted her hands from the keys, the first murmurs of applause began to rise, slowly at first, then growing louder, until the entire hall was clapping. People were on their feet, clapping and cheering, some wiping tears from their eyes. The simple woman felt her heart race, a mixture of relief, joy, and disbelief. She had done it. She had stepped out of the shadows and into the light, even if just for a moment, and the world had seen her for who she truly was. In that moment, something shifted. The whispers of doubt, the laughter, the sneers, all of it vanished. She was no longer the invisible cleaner in the corner. She was a musician, a storyteller, a force of talent and passion that no one could ignore. And though she had just begun, the path ahead was now open, full of possibilities that she had only ever dreamed about. Her hands rested gently on the piano, and she took a deep breath. She could feel the eyes of the audience, the respect of the maestro, and the amazement of everyone who had underestimated her. And in that silence, she knew one thing for certain: she would never let the world underestimate her again. The simple woman's hands rested lightly on the piano keys for a brief moment, as if she were gathering all the courage she had ever known. The hall was still, every ear tuned to her. For a second, she almost felt the weight of every pair of eyes in the room pressing down on her. Her fingers hovered above the keys, trembling slightly, but this time it was not fear, it was anticipation. She had begun with caution, but now she knew the music inside her demanded more. She pressed down on the first chord, and the sound filled the hall with unexpected richness. Unlike before, this time the music seemed to leap out of the piano, surrounding the listeners with warmth and intensity. Every note was alive, vibrant, and full of emotion. It was no longer just a melody. It was a story unfolding. The audience gasped quietly. Those who had been whispering and laughing before were now utterly silent. Some had even stopped breathing, unable to believe what they were hearing. The students who had been practicing all year with formal training sat frozen, staring in disbelief. They had been taught technique, discipline, and theory, but what they were hearing now was something different, something pure and human. The maestro leaned forward, his sharp eyes widening. His arms, which had been folded critically a moment before, now rested loosely at his sides. He could not take his eyes off her hands. Every movement seemed effortless, natural yet impossible. He had seen countless performances in his life, yet he had never encountered anything quite like this. This was not just talent. This was genius hidden in plain sight. The woman's fingers danced over the keys, moving faster, more confidently, but never losing control. She played with precision, yet there was a softness to the music that made it feel alive, almost breathing. Each note told a small piece of her story, her years of struggle, her hidden passion, her longing to be heard. People in the hall began to feel the emotion in a way that was almost tangible. Some closed their eyes, letting the sound wash over them. She had never played for anyone like this before. Even in her imagination she had pictured the moment, but reality was more overwhelming than she had anticipated. She could feel the energy in the room, the shifting mood, the respect forming in real time. She realized she was no longer playing for herself alone. She was playing for everyone in the hall, for every person who had doubted her, for every opportunity she had missed, for every silent night she had spent practicing alone. The music grew stronger. She moved into faster passages, her fingers flying over the keys, hitting notes that seemed impossible to strike in perfect harmony. The room held its breath as the complexity of her playing became apparent. The audience could see the passion in her posture, the focus in her eyes, and the rhythm in her movements. She was telling a story that had never been told before, a story that had been locked inside her for years, and now it poured out without restraint. The maestro stood up slowly. He had to. The sound demanded his full attention. He had believed that he had seen every kind of talent there was, yet here was something extraordinary unfolding in front of him. He could see the fire in her eyes, the dedication in her movements, the purity in her music. He realized he had misjudged her completely, assuming she was nothing more than a simple cleaner in the background. Around the hall, murmurs spread quietly among the audience. Some shook their heads in disbelief. "Who is she?" one whispered. "How can she play like that?" asked another. Even the people who had been skeptical or mocking earlier were now leaning forward, captivated. They were learning a lesson they would not forget. Talent could appear in the most unexpected places. Her music moved fluidly, shifting between soft, delicate melodies and bold, commanding passages. She never rushed. She never hesitated. She let each note breathe, each chord resonate, creating a story that seemed larger than the walls of the hall. The audience could feel her emotions, her struggles, and her triumphs woven into every sound. Some felt tears forming in their eyes. Overwhelmed by the intensity and honesty of her performance, she remembered the nights spent alone at home, practicing on a worn-out keyboard that had belonged to her family for years. She remembered imagining herself on this very stage, imagining the feeling of music echoing through a large hall. She remembered thinking that maybe, one day, someone would hear her, not just hear the sound, but truly listen to her heart. That day had arrived, and she felt a surge of energy and freedom she had never known. The maestro's expression changed with every passing moment. His eyes softened, his mouth opened slightly, and he felt a mix of awe and regret. He had been certain he knew what good music sounded like. He had been certain he could judge talent at a glance. And yet, here was someone who defied all his expectations, someone whose raw, untrained ability had the power to move an entire room. He felt both humbled and inspired. The audience began to respond in ways she did not expect. Soft claps started, tentative at first, then growing louder. Some stood silently, overwhelmed, while others whispered among themselves, sharing their amazement. They had been ready to laugh at her, to dismiss her, but now they were witnesses to something truly remarkable. They realized that judging someone by appearances alone could lead to missing something extraordinary. Her performance reached a crescendo. The notes flowed faster, yet every sound was controlled, precise, and meaningful. She moved with grace and confidence, her heart guiding her hands as much as her skill. The hall seemed to vibrate with the power of her music. People leaned forward, unable to look away. The maestro's eyes glimmered with respect and wonder, and he unconsciously nodded, acknowledging her brilliance. For a moment it felt as if time itself had stopped. There were no distractions, no whispers, no judgments, only the music, the story it told, and the woman who had been invisible until now. She had transformed the space with her talent, and the audience could sense it. Some felt a quiet reverence, others felt inspiration, and all felt the undeniable truth that this woman had something no one could ignore. Finally, she slowed, bringing the music to a gentle, lingering conclusion. The last notes hung in the air, echoing softly as if reluctant to leave. Silence followed. The audience could not immediately move, could not immediately speak. They were suspended in the moment, taking in what they had just witnessed. Every person in the hall had been touched by the music, by the emotion, and by the skill of someone they had underestimated. Then slowly the applause began. One person clapped, then another, then the entire hall erupted in cheers. People stood, clapping, shouting words of admiration, and some even cried openly. The sound was overwhelming, yet it was filled with genuine respect and awe. She had not only performed, she had conquered hearts, challenged assumptions, and left everyone in the room transformed. The maestro moved forward, slowly and deliberately until he stood near the piano. He looked at her with a mixture of amazement and deep respect. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then, with a quiet voice full of admiration, he said, "I have never seen anything like that in my life." His words carried weight. And the audience fell silent again, sensing the gravity of the moment. The simple woman's hands rested gently on the keys. She could hardly believe what had just happened. She had imagined this moment, dreamed of it, worked for it in secret, but now it was real. She could feel the love, respect, and amazement of everyone in the room. For the first time, she truly felt seen. Not just for what she looked like or what she did for a living, but for the talent, passion, and heart she carried inside. The applause continued, echoing through the hall as people rose to their feet. They were cheering not just for the music, but for the courage it took for someone like her to step forward. She had defied expectations, broken invisible barriers, and reminded everyone that talent and passion do not always wear a polished or familiar face. Even as the applause faded slightly, the energy in the room remained. People could not stop talking about what they had just heard. They whispered in awe, sharing their amazement, their newfound respect, and their disbelief. The simple woman had done something extraordinary. She had turned doubt into admiration and invisibility, into recognition. And through it all, she remained humble. She did not smile broadly or seek praise. She simply allowed the music to speak for her as it always had. She had let her heart guide her hands, and now, finally, the world had heard her. In that moment, she knew that her life had changed forever. The path ahead was no longer uncertain. Doors that had seemed forever closed were now opening, and the possibilities were endless. But more than that, she had proven something to herself, that talent, passion, and perseverance could not be hidden forever. No matter how invisible someone might seem, their heart could shine in ways that could astonish the world. The applause had barely settled when the woman slowly lifted her hands from the piano keys. The hall was still buzzing with energy, people whispering and exchanging astonished glances. Everyone had seen her skill, but now a new question filled their minds. Who was she really? How could someone so ordinary, so unassuming, play with such depth and emotion? The maestro stepped forward, his long coat brushing against the polished floor. He was usually composed, reserved, always professional, but now a mixture of surprise and admiration softened his sharp features. He looked directly at her, eyes searching, trying to understand the source of her extraordinary talent. "You?" He started, his voice calm but filled with genuine wonder. "Where did you learn to play like that?" She looked down for a moment, her fingers brushing the last notes lingering on the piano. Then, softly, she began to speak. I've been practicing for many years," she said. "At home, late at night, when no one could hear. I never had a teacher, not really, just a piano and time." The maestro's expression shifted. He had expected talent, yes, but not this story. Not someone so humble, so ordinary, yet capable of producing something extraordinary purely from dedication and love. He took a step closer. "No teacher?" he asked. "Not a single lesson?" She shook her head, a small smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "I learned by listening, by imagining, by trying again and again, even when I made mistakes. I've always loved music, and I wanted to speak through it." The audience listened quietly, captivated not only by her story but by her honesty. Many had assumed that talent could only come from formal training, from famous schools, or from expensive lessons. And here she was, proving them all wrong. Her story was simple, yet powerful, a reminder that passion and dedication could surpass every expectation. Some members of the crowd whispered to each other, astonished. "She's been practicing all this time." "On her own?" one said. "And we didn't even notice her?" murmured another. They realized they had been guilty of judgment, Assuming that appearances or social roles could define someone's ability, the maestro's gaze softened further. He had seen many performers in his life, most polished and well-trained, yet few had moved him the way this woman had. He felt a deep respect for her, not just for the music she played, but for the courage it had taken to step into the spotlight despite doubt, fear, and invisibility. "You have something rare," he said quietly, almost to himself. Then louder, he addressed the room. "What we have just witnessed is not just talent. It is dedication, passion, and a love for music that cannot be taught. It is a gift that comes from within, and it is extraordinary." The audience nodded, murmuring in agreement. Some wiped tears from their eyes. They had laughed before, they had doubted her, and now they were humbled. The simple woman, who had been invisible for so long, had just reminded everyone of an important truth. Greatness often hides where no one expects it. She remained humble. She did not boast or seek praise. Instead, she shared quietly about the life that had shaped her. "I've always worked hard," she said. "I clean halls, I take care of my family, and I try to do my best in everything. Music has been my escape, my way to speak when words aren't enough. I never expected anyone to notice me." The audience was silent again, absorbing her words. They had been captivated by her performance, but now they were touched by her story. It was easy to see why her music felt so real. It came from real experiences, from real struggles, from a life lived quietly but deeply. The maestro studied her for a long moment. He saw her hands, still resting gently on the piano, and he thought of the countless hours of practice she must have invested. He thought of the discipline it must have taken to learn without a teacher, to correct mistakes alone, to keep dreaming despite obstacles. He felt inspired, even humbled. "You have a rare gift," he said again, "and the world deserves to hear it. You should not hide it anymore." She shook her head slightly, unsure. I don't know if I can." "I've always been afraid. Afraid of failing, afraid of judgment." The maestro smiled gently. "You already faced that fear today. You played for all of us, even when no one believed in you. That takes more courage than most of us can imagine. The next step is yours. If you choose it, you will have guidance, support, and a stage to share your gift." Her eyes widened slightly. She had never imagined such an offer. For years she had dreamed quietly, imagining herself performing in front of others, but she never thought anyone would actually care about her music. Now it was real, and yet the fear still lingered, whispering doubts in her mind. Could she really leave her quiet life behind? Could she embrace this new world she had never known? The audience began to cheer softly, sensing the significance of the moment. They were no longer just spectators. They were witnesses to a transformation. They had come expecting entertainment, but what they saw was something far deeper: courage, resilience, and a story of hidden potential. They could see the power of dreams that had been quietly nurtured over years, now shining in the light for all to see. One of the students from the hall approached cautiously, awe written all over his face. I can't believe it," he said. "We thought we were good musicians, but you're amazing. How did you do it?" She smiled faintly, softly. "I practiced. I listened. I never gave up. That's all. Anyone can do it if they believe and keep trying." The maestro stepped closer, his voice calm but firm. "I want to offer you something. A chance to train, to perform, to be recognized for the talent you have. The world needs to see this. Your story, your music deserves to be shared." Her heart raced. This was the moment she had always dreamed of, yet now it felt real, and real was scary. She could feel the weight of choice pressing down on her, the safety of the life she knew, or the unknown of a life filled with possibilities. Challenges and recognition. The audience waited silently, sensing the importance of the decision. They had seen her perform, they had heard her story, and now they understood her courage. They felt a collective hope that she would take the next step, that she would allow her talent to shine beyond the walls of the hall. She took a deep breath, looking around. She saw the faces of people who had ignored her before, people who had laughed or doubted her. And yet she did not feel anger or resentment. She felt understanding. They had judged her because they did not know her story. But now her music had spoken for her. Her talent had told her story in a way no words could. Slowly, she nodded. I will try, she said. Her voice was soft but firm. I want to learn more, to share my music. I want to see how far I can go. The maestro smiled, a genuine warmth in his eyes. Then we will guide you. We will help you. And the world will hear your music. The audience erupted in applause again, louder and more heartfelt than before. This time, it was not just for the performance. They were celebrating courage, determination, and the beginning of a new journey. People stood, clapping, cheering, and some even wiping tears from their eyes. They had been part of something extraordinary, a moment where talent met opportunity, and courage met recognition. She looked at the piano one last time, running her fingers lightly over the keys. This was more than a stage. It was a symbol of all the dreams she had held quietly, the nights of practice, the endless hope that someday someone would listen. And now, someone had, and more than that, the world was offering her a chance to be seen, to be heard, and to shine for the first time in her life. She felt fully recognized, not as a simple woman, not as someone overlooked, but as a musician, a storyteller, and a person whose dedication and heart had created something extraordinary. She had stepped out of the shadows, and the light was finally hers. The simple woman stepped away from the piano and looked around the hall. The applause still echoed softly, fading into a quiet hum, but the feeling it left behind was enormous. She had come into this world unnoticed, overlooked by everyone, and yet now, in a single performance, she had captured the hearts of all who had watched. She could hardly believe what had happened, and yet she felt a strange clarity settle over her. The maestro stood nearby. His usual stern expression softened into one of admiration. "You have an incredible gift," he said gently, "and now the world knows it." She nodded, a mixture of excitement and nervousness in her chest. Her life had changed in ways she could hardly imagine. Up until now, she had lived quietly, finding comfort in her routines, in the simple work she did, in the music she kept to herself. But the music had always been part of her. It had been her voice when no one listened, her escape when the world felt cold. And now, she realized, it could be more than that. The next days were a whirlwind. The organizers of the event, the maestro, and even people from outside the hall reached out to her. They offered opportunities to perform, to learn, to travel, and to share her music with audiences far beyond what she had ever imagined. At first, the thought was terrifying. She had lived a life of quiet comfort with no attention, no pressure. Suddenly, doors were opening, and she felt unprepared, but with guidance from the maestro and encouragement from those who had witnessed her talent, she began to embrace this new life. Her first public performance after the event was nerve-wracking. She felt her hands shake as she sat at the piano in front of a larger audience, her heart pounding. But as soon as she pressed the first note, the fear melted away, replaced by the music she had lived with for so long. Every note, every chord flowed naturally, filled with the emotion she had kept hidden for years. People in the audience were captivated. They leaned forward, silent at first, then slowly began to clap and cheer. They were witnessing not just a performance, but a story, her story being told with honesty and passion. And she felt, for the first time, that her life had purpose beyond the small corners she had known. With each performance, her confidence grew. She traveled to new places, met other musicians, and learned from teachers who had once seemed unreachable. She discovered that there was always more to learn, always another layer of depth to explore in music, and she embraced every lesson eagerly. The quiet woman who had once cleaned the hall now became someone who could command a stage, someone who could move an audience with nothing but her hands and her heart. Despite her growing fame, she never forgot where she came from. She returned to the music hall where it had all begun, sometimes simply to sit quietly at the piano before a performance. She remembered the fear, the doubt, and the quiet nights of practice that had brought her to this point. And she wanted others to understand that anyone, no matter how invisible, could have hidden talent and dreams waiting to be discovered, she began mentoring others who had been overlooked or underestimated. Young students, women and men from humble backgrounds, people who had been told they were not good enough, she worked with them, encouraging them to practice, to believe, and to find their own voice. She remembered how it had felt to be invisible, and she wanted to give others the confidence she had finally found through her guidance. Many discovered their own talent, and the cycle of inspiration continued. The simple woman who had once been ignored became a symbol of hope and possibility. She showed the world that greatness could appear anywhere, that passion and dedication mattered more than appearances, and that courage to step forward could change everything. The Maestro, who had first recognized her gift, remained a mentor and a friend. He spoke often about the day she had stunned him, using her story to teach humility and to remind others that talent cannot always be judged by outward appearances. He admired her not only for her skill but for her humility, resilience, and the kindness with which she treated those around her. Years passed, and she performed in concert halls around the world. People came to hear her music not just for the notes but for the emotion, the honesty, and the story behind it. She had become more than a musician. She had become an inspiration, proof that anyone could rise above doubt, fear, and invisibility. She had transformed herself, and in doing so, she had changed the lives of countless others, yet she remained grounded. She still cherished quiet moments, the simple joy of playing a piano in an empty hall, or listening to a melody that had never been played before. Fame and recognition did not change the essence of who she was. She had learned that talent and passion were valuable, yes, but the heart and dedication behind them were what truly mattered. One evening, after a long performance in a grand concert hall, she walked backstage to sit at the same piano she had once cleaned and listened to in secret. She pressed her fingers against the keys gently, feeling the familiar texture under her touch. The memory of that first quiet practice came flooding back, the fear, the hope, the longing, and she smiled. She had come so far, but the music was still hers, as it had always been. She thought about the young students she mentored, the people who had been invisible like she once had been. She thought about the Maestro who had believed in her, the audience who had been captivated, and the countless moments that had led her to this point. She understood now that life could change in an instant, that courage could unlock hidden potential, and that the simplest person could leave a lasting mark on the world. The applause of her final performance of the evening still echoed in her mind. But it was not the recognition that mattered most. What mattered was the journey, the years of quiet practice, the courage to step forward, and the determination to share her heart through music. She had been invisible, overlooked, and underestimated, but she had refused to let that define her. She had stepped into the light, and in doing so, had transformed not only her life, but the lives of everyone who witnessed her journey. And so, she continued performing, teaching, inspiring, and living a life that was once unimaginable. She knew that challenges would come, that fear would return from time to time, but she had learned that talent, passion, and perseverance were stronger than doubt. She had proven that even the quietest, simplest voice could speak loudly when nurtured with care and courage. In the end, she became more than a musician. She became a symbol of hope, of possibility, and of the power that exists in every person, no matter how overlooked or underestimated. Her story reminded the world that greatness can hide in the most unexpected places, waiting for someone brave enough to bring it to light. And she never forgot the lesson that had started it all, that love for what you do, dedication to your craft, and the courage to take the first step can change everything. Years later, she would return to that first music hall, standing on the same stage where she had once been invisible. This time, the hall was hers, not as a guest, not as a cleaner, but as the main performer. She looked out at the audience, filled with familiar faces and new ones, all waiting to hear her music. She smiled, placed her hands on the piano, and let the first note flow. The music filled the hall, and with it, the story of a simple woman who had been ignored, underestimated, and overlooked. But through courage, passion, and love for her craft, she had become unforgettable.